I've heard 4 different versions of some of these stories.
Fair and balanced.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You guys are funny.
Well, there's some things that I've forgotten. Rich asked some insightful questions, and I can't remember how I was feeling or what I was thinking or what.
Included, so I could have answered for you.
Whatever.
My name is David Wayne Gurwell. Gurwell.
All right. And so I'm not prepared. I'm gonna get my list of questions. So tell me about your mom and dad. What are their names? Where did they grow up?
My mom and dad was born in 1927, mom in 28. My mother was from a small town called Guthrie Center. My dad grew up in Des Moines, Iowa. My dad's name is John Edgar Gurwell, and my mother's name is Winifred Juanita Tagg.
Where did the middle name Juanita come from?
Well, mother never really told us that story, and grandma was kind of a no-touch, no-talk type of person, so you couldn't get any information from her. There isn't a Juanita in the Tagg family. Possibly that.
Okay. So, how did your mom and dad meet?
My mom and dad, as far as I know where they met, my mother was an office worker and they were downtown Des Moines and met during a lunch activity.
What was your dad like?
My dad was a throwback. I think he wished he would have been born in 1870. His dad was an outdoorsman. His dad was a veteran. His dad went to World War II when he had 6 kids at age 40-some years old, left everything behind. Total outdoorsman, carpenter, self-made businessman, had his own business. And I think my dad wanted to emulate that a little bit, except I don't think he had the capabilities that his dad had. However, my dad was rather dynamic personality, just lacked some skills to accomplish the things he really wanted to accomplish, in my opinion. I hope I'm being fair.
It's your show, man. You get to say what you want. So what did your mom and dad do for work as you were growing up?
My mom and dad's work careers. My dad worked for his dad in a company called Gurwell Transfer and Storage. My grandfather died young. He was 56 years old. My dad was in his 30s. He did that job until the family could no longer work together. He had some brothers. At that point, he was lost. He thought he would become an auto mechanic. He ended up going into the carpentry trade, which was something that he actually wanted to do, just wasn't sure he could do it and support a family. Because the career change came when he already had 4 kids. He preferred that my mom stay at home and take care of everything. My dad could hard boil an egg, but that's about it. Never ran a vacuum cleaner. So I think he liked the fact that my mom was a stay-at-home mom. But my dad had a heart attack at age 40. And it made my mom think about her life and what she needed to do to support herself. She had worked a little bit as a lunchroom, not a volunteer. She got paid part-time. But at that point, she went to work full-time at what the time was called Bell Telephone. And she was what they call a toll investigator. She would call people that, at those days, to make a long-distance call, you had to ask permission and pay a rate at the end of your phone call and agree to pay. she investigated people that lied and cheated and tried to get them to pay their bills.
For sure. Can you talk a little bit about, tell me what Saydel was like, what that community was like? I only know in a way from like seeing like when I was at your mom's funeral, I was like, oh, the
Yes.
entire community knew, like everyone knew her, you know?
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about what was Saydel like? What was that community?
So I grew up north of Des Moines. I actually wasn't, I was born in a Des Moines hospital, and my mom and dad lived in the city of Des Moines when I was born. When I was 5 years old, I have 3 older brothers, but when I was 5 years old, we moved to Saylor Township, which was, it's an unincorporated area north of Des Moines. And they didn't have their own police department, but they had their own fire department, and they had the county sheriffs there. So it was a small community. I think my graduating class was 125 kids. I'm not sure how many thousand people lived in the community. They did have a volunteer fire department. We lived on well water. We lived in a rural setting. Some people still had, we still had a septic tank. Some people didn't even have indoor bathrooms in the community when we were very young. It had 2 elementary schools, 1 junior high, and 1 high school called Saydel High. And very community oriented. My dad was on the fire department. And so the way I was raised is that you know your neighbors, you know something about them, and they know something about you. And it was pretty true because you couldn't do very many things as a child and not get home and have your parents already know about it. Somebody was reporting on somebody, but I looked at everybody as a friend and a neighbor, and I think I learned that from my dad, and my mother was very personable also. She didn't spend a lot of time judging people.
Did your mom ever lock the door to her house?
Did my mom and dad ever lock the door to the house? Maybe one time. And I don't know why that would have been. I think they had locks on the doors. But I don't ever remember one time being told to lock the door. Or for the cars for that matter. The keys are always in the car. Sometimes the key to the door hung in the door. I do remember that. So no, it was a very secure area. I have 3 brothers. I am what they call the number 3 child. My oldest brother's name is John Edgar Gurwell. 1 year, less than 2 years later, my next oldest brother, J. Noel Gurwell, was born. I think that was in 49. I was born in 1952, and then Dana was born in 1957. Dana Lee Gurwell, he's the youngest. And we all lived in the same house the whole time of our childhood. We never moved.
So, talking about, you're with a bunch of brothers who you're hanging out with a lot. I'm sure there's some stories. I've heard things about you riding wagons off of garages. Can you talk a little bit about some of the stories you remember of just the stuff you would get into with them?
Well, when we were very young, so I would have only been 5 years old, we lived in Urbandale, and I remember we managed to get the manhole cover off of a storm sewer line out back, and we threw stuff down there and dammed it up because we thought that would be pretty cool. One time we put a rope across the road on the ground, and when a car came, we pulled it up to surprise them. We thought that was pretty funny. So yeah, whatever we could dream up, we couldn't find very many reasons for not doing it. If we wanted to climb the neighbor's apple tree and take apples, we just did that. If we wanted to use the apples in our yard to throw them at cars as they drove by on the highway, of course we had a lookout so we wouldn't get caught. And they would tell us when to throw, so we would just throw and then we would run. So yeah, we did that. Yeah, we built one time we built a kind of a mouse trap. It's a game where you put the ball at the top and it goes down. We built something like that to run a wagon on. My dad was pretty open-minded. I think he was happy that we were being creative, and my dad did he was a storyteller about all the bad things he did as a child. So I guess we figured that was all okay. It's just, since you're a child, you can do whatever you want. Of course, my mother didn't like it, but we hid everything from her, so she didn't know what was going on. But yeah, I remember one time we found, we were in a canoe, we snatched tadpoles out of the lake and we threw them against trees to squash them because we thought it would be funny. The stories are endless. We actually only had 2 bedrooms for us to sleep in, so we had to share beds until we were in our teens, and the older 2 finally left and there was more space. But that's the way we grew up. It was pretty close. Sports together, play together, trouble together.
So, one other story I heard was that you guys would race a car in your backyard?
Oh yeah, my dad bought this spare car, and I can't for the life of me understand why we didn't get in more trouble, because him and Mom would leave for the weekend as we got older. And, well, I told you about not locking anything up, so the keys were always around. Eventually, he bought a motorcycle, and when he took the key to that, we figured out how to start it without the key. But they lived on a 2-acre plot of land, and there was a flat spot in the backyard. And we would just drive the car around in a circle. And somebody else had another car, I don't remember who that was, but would bring it down. And so you just hold the wheel like that and go as fast as you could. So it was pretty evident what had happened while Mom and Dad were gone, and I don't remember getting any trouble. Like I said, I think maybe I grew up thinking it was okay to do whatever stupid thing you wanted, because that's what kids do. So we were allowed a lot of latitude. We would ride his motorcycle till we wrecked it, and then he did get mad.
How did you get to school?
It was idyllic in that you could go wherever you wanted, man. I never considered that. So I don't know if you're recording me right now, but you mentioned something about whether I enjoyed that to some degree, being in the Saydel area, and I did. I mean, we were free to do whatever. We were friends with everybody. Maybe not close friends, but we knew each other to enough of a degree that you knew what was happening with their family, you knew what was happening with their siblings. You knew what that person's interests were. And they weren't there for you to just verbally abuse. You treated people with respect. So the neighborhood was a good neighborhood.
For sure.
You asked me something else and I lost it, what you wanted.
No, you're good. Oh, man. How did you get to high school?
Oh. Well, the one thing about living in a community like this, there weren't any sidewalks anywhere. And at that time, walking to school was frowned on. So the elementary school was about 600 yards away, but they insisted on me riding the bus. Maybe that's because the speed limit on the road was 60 mile an hour and there was no sidewalk, and I would have been in elementary school. So they might have been using better judgment there. In junior high, I think, junior high and high school, I rode the bus. I know that. And I believe the bus ride was probably about a half an hour.
Was there ever any, like, safety things on the bus in high school? Anyone who hurt themselves?
Well, you weren't really supposed to have knives on the bus, but you could get away with it. So outside of that, well, they had the flip out stop sign, but compared to today's world, no. But the bus driver was respected because you could get kicked off the bus pretty easily, and they knew who you were, and most parents complied with that. They didn't complain about it, as I know because I was kicked off the bus once.
Okay, so why were you kicked off the bus?
Well, I got kicked off the bus once for actually doing something that I knew was wrong. There was a guy on the bus, and I wanted to give him a hard time. So, actually, I was mean. I threw a bar of soap at him, and I said he needed a shower. So, that's pretty low. That's not who I am, but I did it. So, actually, I'm glad I got caught. And glad I got in trouble because it reaffirmed that that's not who I really am. I was kind of embarrassed by it by the time it was all over.
For sure.
So it was a lesson well learned.
So I heard the story about a guy who had his finger ripped off on the bus.
Yeah, there was somebody, we were in the bus parking lot at school, and he jumped up to, because in those days you could put the windows down on the bus and you could high five and grab people's hands. There wasn't a lot of controls. So the guy jumped up, and I believe it was the stop sign on the bus, and as he came down, his ring finger got caught on there and ripped it off. Yeah, it's kind of tragic, actually.
What do you remember about the first time you saw Adelaide? When was it? Yeah. What was she wearing?
Well, so my high school days didn't include Adelaide. I didn't meet her in high school. My high school days were 9th grade through 12th grade, and I got out of there in 1970. And Adelaide came to the Saydel High School district as a foreign exchange student in 1972. She just happened to stay with a family that was friends with our family, as a family of girls, same church. And since it was a small community, you kind of still kept track of that. I still lived in the community after I was out of high school, and didn't go to area community college until 72. So I met her just because I kept tabs on what's happening in the community. And the other thing was, the year before I met Adelaide in 1971, I was still fresh out of high school, partying with people from the neighborhoods, still knew what was happening, hadn't left the neighborhood, still living at home. Saydel had another foreign exchange student from Brazil. Her name was Rosie. Don't know her last name. But I got a date with her. I met her at some parties and took her out a few times, and I thought, wow, I really like the way these Brazilian girls are. And so when I heard there was another foreign exchange student, I thought, well, just makes sense to meet her also. So that's how we met. I got a date arranged by these other girls. They set it up for me. I hadn't really met her till I met her for a date.
What was Adelaide like?
Well, she was very young. She was very dynamic. She had, well, I thought she was absolutely gorgeous. I thought her personality was sparkling. She had more energy than anybody else I was around at the time. And she was a great conversationalist, even though she spoke broken English at the time. She was interested in everything she saw and everything around her. So to be around her wasn't boring at all. Not at all. There was always something to talk about. Any subject you brought up was worth delving into.
For sure. So how long was she here? How long were you able to be around her before she went back to Brazil?
So Adelaide came to Saydel, like I said, in 1972. And it was in the fall. And I met her for a New Year's date. I think I actually ran into her at a high school basketball game in December of 72. And then that's kind of how we got the date thing going. I saw her. I didn't talk to her. Got the date arranged for New Year's Eve. And so took her out to some New Year's Eve parties in the first of the year. And that's when we decided it'd be worth meeting up again to have some other dates. At that time, I was working construction. I had my own life. And when I started at the area community college, I had to work nights. So she came. By then she was gone. She stayed from December and she went through high school graduation. She was 16 years old. I was 19, and she actually was allowed to go through high school graduation at the school because they wanted her to have the graduation experience. She never really met the requirements for a high school, but she got a diploma, which worked out good later because as she got into studying here, she could prove that she had a high school diploma in the United States. But she went home. The last night before she went home, I kept her out all night, which was kind of unfair for the host family because we didn't ask in advance. We just stayed out all night. And so I'm sure we created a lot of chaos for that family because I think she had an afternoon flight to go home. And I never really asked them because I didn't really care what they had to say. Mostly because I wanted to do what I wanted to do. So it didn't really matter, and it was the last night. So we stayed out all night, talked all night. She told me more about her life in Brazil. And by that time, I think I discovered that, this girl is something else. It's the kind of girl that has appeal for me if I were to ever think about a long-term relationship or a marriage. I'm like, this girl doesn't seem frivolous. She's not someone who bores me when we're out having something to eat or drink. Of course, we couldn't do that because she was underage. But I do remember thinking, this girl has what I like about in a woman. And she also seemed very mature to me. That was another thing. She seemed very mature, even though I was immature.
So then, what did you talk about anything in terms of, oh, I'm going to see you again, or was it understood that, this is right, where did it leave off?
Well, as far as looking ahead to the future as she was leaving, of course I thought it would be nice, but the reality of it is I was 20 years old. I had no career. She lived in another country thousands of miles away. I wasn't so naive that I thought, oh, we'll just do letter correspondence. And I mean, I knew nothing about the outside world. I grew up in Saydel Community School District. Anybody from another country was just exotic. Never be me. And I couldn't talk to any family or friends about it because they were all of the same mentality. This was the Saydel School District, Big things in your future isn't what I heard about as I was growing up. Work at the neighborhood, whatever, construction company. And so I believe we did make a few comments. Yeah, it'd be nice to look you up again someday. But with actually no real thinking that could become a reality. So I did have her address, and well, there's another little tidbit I should tell you that made me want her. When she did leave, right before she left, she gave me a little Post-it note or a little piece of paper about that big, and it said, "Eu te amo." And of course, being your typical American, if you're here, you got to speak English. Who cares about your language or your country? But I was totally invested in finding out what that meant. So I took it to as many people as I could that I thought knew Spanish or some foreign language. Of course, I wouldn't have taken it to a German-speaking person. But eventually I found out that it most likely meant, I met nobody who spoke Portuguese, but it's similar to Spanish. So somebody said, well, my guess is that means I love you. And that was the first time in all my datings and hot nights out that I ever took the statement, I love you, as a serious issue. Because I thought, well, maybe she does love me. That'd be pretty cool if she did. But there were so many obstacles, I had no idea how that anybody could ever overcome those. I wasn't making plans to go there. Besides, I was going to the area community college. I hadn't thought about my own future. I didn't really have a career. I didn't know what I wanted to do with myself. So I didn't know what to do about it. I felt so bad about it, I only wrote a couple of times, didn't know what to write because I wanted it badly, but I didn't know. I didn't think there was any way to achieve it. So what happened was I just went to the area community college. I spent a lot of time getting high and drawing pictures. I was totally without guidance. I was totally without a plan. I was studying commercial art, for God's sake, and I'm about as far from being a commercial artist as you could get. I actually had no interest in it, but I knew that studying fine arts really wasn't that practical, and besides, it was more expensive. I had to pay my way through college. So, with those things on my platter, I thought, well, there's just no way. And then, so what happens is I finish at the area community college. I make an attempt, 2 attempts. I get hired as a commercial artist. One lasted 2 days, the other one lasted a week. I just couldn't bear it. I felt phony. So I went back to my roots and I got a construction job. And however, the fine arts part of my training never left me. And I had a camera. And I spent a lot of time working, getting high, and taking pictures. So what happened to me is I thought, I should do a photo journal. Where should I do that at? I was like, oh, well, maybe I could go to Brazil. Yeah, that's a good idea. Totally clueless, totally without resources, totally with no background, and not the kind of training or upbringing that helps you pursue those kind of answers to those kind of questions. But I thought, I'm going to do it anyway. I'm just going to get a ticket. I'm going to go on a photojournalism tour. And I know where I might be able to stay free of charge. If I go to Brazil, I can run into Adelaide. She'll show me around. I won't get lost. So I can do this photojournalism thing. So I built myself a self-contained film developing box that you could develop black and white film from, because I love black and white film. Built the box, it had hand holes that go into it, and I had all the equipment, made it light proof. And I thought it could double as a suitcase, because I needed to travel light. So I got it all arranged. I bought tickets. I didn't really talk to anybody about it. I saved every penny. I'm a saver. I saved every penny I could save. I worked a high-paying construction job. I got a job on a bridge crew because it paid the best. Most dangerous, but paid the best. And saved all my pennies. I knew I needed to get a passport, so I'm doing this totally on my own. So I got a passport, and then I just bought tickets. I bought the tickets to go from Miami because it was cheaper, without really having a plan on how to get to Miami. But I knew it would be cheaper. So, I never did write to Adelaide to tell her I was coming. I hadn't talked to her for a while. Felt kind of guilty. Besides, didn't know how it was going to work. So I get the tickets, get the passport, can't even remember if I had to get a visa or not. And made arrangements to go. Oh, the last bit of arranging I had to do was I had to figure out how to get to Miami. I found out there was a company that was in the business of arranging drivers for people that had multiple vehicles, and they moved to Florida, and you could drive their car to Florida and drop it off at their house. So that's the way I made arrangements to get to Florida. I'm talking a lot.
It's all great stuff. So, okay, so you've got this thing. When do you let your parents know, when do you let your family know about this plan?
Well, I think I told my brothers that I was going, but our family doesn't have one of these communicative families where you go and talk to mom and dad and say, did you know so-and-so's do? So I think the way my mom found out is she found the passport and she found my ticket. And I never did tell my dad until I don't remember personally telling him until maybe a week before I left, because I needed to get to Iowa City to pick up the car to transport. The people that needed the car moved lived in Iowa City. So I needed to get to Iowa City, and I didn't know anybody that would drive me over here. So I had to rely on Mom and Dad, you know. So I don't ever, like I said, remember saying, "Hey, Dad, I got this plan. I'm going to Brazil." I just made my arrangements and did everything on my own. I mean, I would have had less problems with it, because they probably would have said, "Did you arrange for this, or did you arrange for that?" So I had no one to talk to. I just thought all I got to do is get to Brazil, give the taxi driver the address, and go to the Adelaide's house. Thought it would be that easy. Turned out it wasn't. So my parents took me over there.
Go ahead.
My parents took me to Iowa City. I drove down to the panhandle of Florida, pulled off in a rest area, slept on the table till it got too damp out from the humidity. Then I finished the night in the car, drove to Miami, dropped the car off, got my bags, and went to the airport.
Wow. So now you land in Brazil.
No. I got on a plane in Miami and flew to Lima, Peru, and got there at like 2 o'clock in the morning. So everybody's getting off the plane, so I got off the plane. Well, this is in the days when a lot of times a plane would continue on and you didn't. You know, they just refuel it. I don't know how they're doing it now, but not having really looked at my tickets to see what flight I was supposed to be on, you know, and not really thinking ahead that the announcements were going to be in Spanish, I got off the airplane, and then I heard an announcement, and I thought, well, I better get back on the airplane, because I think I left my ticket on the plane even. And everything's written in Spanish, and like I said, I didn't memorize the flight numbers, so I had the ticket, because as I went back to get on the plane, the stewardess or the person was working there, and I started to show her my ticket, and she's like, she saw me get off, and she's like, it's okay, just get on the plane. So that's what I did. I got back on the same plane. So plane takes off, and after what I thought was a sufficient amount of time to get to Rio, I asked the stewardess, "Hey, when are we getting to Rio?" And her eyes got real big, and she said, "Well, this plane isn't going to Rio, it's going to Buenos Aires." I'm like, "No, I'm going to Rio." And she said, like, "No, you're not. You're going to Buenos Aires." And I'm like, "I know that's not on the itinerary. I'm going to Lima and I'm going to Rio." So then I started panicking. And there wasn't anything to do except sit down. So I sat down and got to Buenos Aires. So it means flew right past Rio. That's why it took so long. So I got off the airplane there, and it was late in the afternoon. And I had to make a new plan, because in those days, there's no place to, they're just not very helpful, you know. And besides, I only spoke English. So you can recognize things. You know what an information desk looks like. So I go to the information desk and tell them what the problem is. And they're like, "Well, we can book you a flight to Rio. Just give us some more money." So, you know, you give them more money. I didn't have very much money. I think I only had like $300 cash total for the whole trip. And I think it was like $120 or something. So I had to pay the fee, and then I said, well, what am I going to do now? And she said, well, the airport closes at like 6 o'clock or 8 o'clock. You're going to have to leave the airport and then come back tomorrow for your flight. So the one thing I noticed when I got off the plane there, I didn't know they were having a revolution, Perón, in those days, but they were. So there are a lot of military guys around with automatic weapons all over the place, military police everywhere. And I knew from my experience at the help desk that I wasn't going to get any help and nobody's going to speak English. So I'm like, I had to come up with a way to not leave the airport. So it was late. So what I did is I went down to the furthest away from the help desk I could get to a bathroom. And I climbed up on the toilet and I sat up there on my haunches on the toilet. And I stayed there. And those bathrooms, there was an easy chair in them. There was kind of a lounge type atmosphere in the bathroom, but I didn't want to be caught there. So I shut the door to the toilet, got up on my haunches, just kept my ears going as long as I could until I didn't hear anything. And then once I didn't hear anything, I got out of there and sat in the chair. I couldn't sleep real heavy because I didn't know how to get up so I just dozed. So anyway, that's how I spent the night. Got on the plane, went to Rio.
Wow.
Got to Rio, but there's still a lot more adventure along the way because I didn't have the right address for Adelaide's house. And it turns out she didn't actually live in Rio. She lived in Santos. And I found that out by the people in the airport in Rio were more helpful. They had some people that could kind of speak English. And I had the street address and the apartment number, but I thought it was in Rio. So I left without writing down the address. I just remembered it. And the woman that was at the help desk heard me say, Avenida Presidente Wilson. And the woman said, I know what city that's in because I go there for my beach visit for vacation. And I've stayed on that street. It's the main street in this waterfront area called Santos. She said, if you got the right street address, that's where you have to go. It's in Santos. The problem was that's like a 7-hour bus ride. And there's no airport there. So, and I didn't have any money. So at that point, I hadn't really set in full panic because I knew that wouldn't serve me. I had to just keep going. So they're like, you need to go. They said the way you get there is you go to Sao Paulo. You can buy a ticket to fly there. It's a short flight. Or you can take a bus there. It's like a 6-hour bus ride. And so I just left there kind of deflated. Because they aren't going to buy me a bus ticket or put me on a taxi or anything. So I thought I'd take my chances on the street. So I went out on the street and I just started talking to people. said, do you speak English? Do you speak English? Do you speak English? Do you speak English? I went up to a movie theater place. I thought, well, she might speak English. The ticket sales lady. I said, do you speak English? By then, I wasn't having any luck. I was starting to wonder what's next. But I knew I needed to keep looking. So all of a sudden, this guy hears me. And I turn around. There's a big guy, big husky guy, black guy. And he said, you need some help? I'm like, God, I know that language. It's English. You know? So I'm like, yeah, I need help. Can you help me? He's like, yeah. He said, I love to speak English. I'm studying English. I'm trying to work on my speaking English. I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to help you. So I give him the whole story. And he said, well, I think I can help you with that. I said, well, how can you help me? He said, I can't help you today, but I can help you tomorrow. I said, how's that? He's like, well, you need to find a place to stay for the night. He said, I can help you do that. And then what I could do, he said, I can get if you'll buy the tickets and do everything, he said, I will come back here tomorrow morning and I will meet you and I will get you to the bus station. I'll get you on the bus. I'll ride with you all the way to Santos. And then we'll get a taxi or whatever, and I'll take you right to the address that you've got. He said, you just got to you got to stay overnight here, and I'll pick you up in the morning. So I'm like, I'm totally believing everything. It never occurred to me that this guy would be bullshitting me. I mean, I was so desperate, and because of where I grew up, you just didn't do that kind of shit to people. So I'm like, he's just telling me the truth. I just know it. So he takes me and get an overnight room. I didn't have any bags because my bags went to Rio. The bags went to Rio. So all I really had was my billfold and my tickets. And I had my camera so I could take pictures. But everything else was gone. The box I made, the one bag I did have with clothes in it, everything's gone. And by then I'm already a day and a half into those clothes, or 2 days, whatever. But he comes back and gets me the next day, takes me to the bus station, sits on the bus with me. I talk with him in English, takes me to all the way to Santos, and then I can't remember if we got a taxi or a city bus, but we got from the bus station to Adelaide's apartment complex. They had a doorman there, wasn't going to let us in. He told the guy the story. The doorman knew who Adelaide was. He knew that Adelaide had been a foreign exchange student. And so he takes us up to the floor, takes us to the door. And then the guy knocked on the door and boom, Adelaide answered the door. I don't think she recognized me. But after I talked to her for a minute, so the guy stayed there and we told her the overview of the story. And I said, hello. That's how it got going. That's how I made it to Adelaide's house.
What was the first thing she says? She sees you.
Well, she was a 17-year-old high school student. So I think she was just shocked. I don't remember her saying, oh, David, it's so good. I think she was more like, what the fuck are you doing here? Like, this is not reality. You know, what are you doing here? Because she had no warning. Yeah. I think it just blew her away, actually. I told somebody the other day that what I wanted was I could see my future being just a construction guy, not getting the big pie. So it's like, fuck it. I'm gonna have one adventure in my life. This is gonna be a fucking adventure. I don't care if it lasts for a week, 2 weeks, because I bought the ticket open-ended. I didn't have a date to come back.
Where do you think, so it sounds like almost everyone around you had a different mindset than you. Like, where do you think it came? Do you think it's just you always had it?
Well, I always wanted some adventure in my life, and I could see by looking at my parents' lives and everybody around me in that small community, like, is this what my life's really going to be? You know? And the guy that I went to college with, I'll show you his website later. He is a professional fucking artist. That's what he did with his life. Fine art. He does art for, cities, communities, a big piece of art, big artwork. He doesn't just sit around and paint pictures or do advertising. He's an artist, like Rodin. He's got a whole thing going. He's got people that do his art for him. He's the whole thing, man. That's the kind of guy that I got high with. And we dreamed of everything you can dream of. We're going to have hash sitting on the table in the living room once we get our own place. We're just going to do art. And that's where it was born. Like, fuck it, I can do this. But I was so ill-equipped as far as the details. It's a miracle that I got to her house.
How
did that guy not hit me on the head and steal the rest of my money and my camera? Why would he do that, Rich? That's God's truth, how I got there. Well, who does that?
I wouldn't stay on the bus for 7 hours for you.
What did he see in it for himself? He wanted something professional with his career, and his English really mattered to him, and American English. And he could speak it pretty well, but his accent was horrible, and some of his sentence structure was way off.
Yeah, talk on the bus route.
We did. I don't remember what we talked about, but we talked the whole time.
Continuity.
Yeah.
So this person shows up at her dorm.
At her parents' apartment.
Apartment. Sorry.
Yeah. She was going to high school class every day. She was still going to high school.
So how do her parents react? What happens next?
So after I get to the door and surprise Adelaide, tell her my story, there wasn't anything really coming together about thinking about the next week or, oh, glad to see you. There was none of that. What happened was, I think, Adelaide being who she was, just to look at, what happens next here. Because she knew I didn't have any money. She knew I didn't have a place to stay. She knew the kind of person that I was, because the second date that I took her on, I took her out to a restaurant, and when we got there, I reached in my billfold before we ordered, and I didn't have any money with me. Totally ill-prepared. I took her out on a date with no money. So she kind of knew, and I hadn't written to her much, and she knew that I was kind of a day-to-day kind of guy. And since, Adelaide achieved the goal of becoming a doctor, you know, that organization comes early on in their lives, right? You got to have a goal, you got to make things happen, you got to stay on schedule. Well, I was like the opposite end of the spectrum, and she knew it, even at age 17. So she was being very practical. And so it's like, you want something to eat, you want to take a walk on the beach, we need to find you a place to stay, and just some practical things. So that's what we did. We went for a walk on the beach. And I can't really remember what we reminisced about. I was just so damn happy to see her. I think that's what I expressed to her. I wasn't like, what you've been doing lately. It's just like, man, this is just great. I was just feeling it. But I had to get real a little bit, like, okay. So they set me up at a place, an overnight, it's called a pension. It's just somebody's house that they've opened up, and they let rooms out, and they serve you a little coffee and bread in the morning. So I think I stayed 2 nights in the pension, and after that, it was entirely evident that I was either going to have to get on the plane and just go home, like tomorrow, or within a week. And I still had no baggage and no clothing. So their family, being what it was, they invited me there to the house to stay, even though they lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 7th floor along the beach. When I realized that I didn't really have any way to sustain my trip, and the fact that I didn't have any clothes, we talked about it. And when I say we talked about it, Adelaide and I talked about it because her parents didn't speak any English. And so everything's being relayed to them. So I never spoke to her parents at all. So I don't know what they were thinking, because I couldn't get a feel for that just through general conversation. So Adelaide was in control of all of that. But what they offered is, they offered me a place to stay, and they offered to get my bags. In fact, they may have already started on that process, because I didn't get to Santos until days after my bags would have been in Rio. So through some miracle, they made arrangements with the airline, and they transported my stuff from Rio to Santos and delivered it. So another 6-hour trip on their part, or they flew it to whatever. Anyway, yeah, it would have been more than that, because Rio to Sao Paulo and then Sao Paulo to Santos. Anyway, I did get the stuff. I don't know what I did in the meantime. Maybe they washed my clothes and I sat in a towel or wore some of Louise's clothes. I guess I don't really remember what happened. But the daily life went on for them. Adelaide was a high school student. So let's see. December, she was out of school because it was summer there. So she wasn't actually going to school in December. They were on break from school. And so I don't really, this thing just kind of morphed into, things just happened. And I think what happened was, they discussed it, but I wasn't a part of the discussion. And one of my lifelong regrets is that I never spent more time asking Adelaide's parents what they thought. I don't really know what they did think. I could just kick myself. Of course, I didn't speak Portuguese for the longest time, and of course, they lived there, we lived here, we didn't see each other all that often. I learned to be observant as an alien, because aliens have to know what could happen to them, right? They always got an eye over their shoulder. I wasn't afraid. I didn't have that kind of fear because people, I think they loved me. They loved me at least for loving Adelaide. So I got the benefit of that. And yeah, that made the difference. That made the difference.
How do you look back on it all? I mean, in a way, it's this incredible series of events that led to, like, you know what I'm saying? This is not everyone's story. How do you look back on it?
Looking back, at the time, I wished I would have been more curious, maybe 5 or 10 years down the road, said my thank yous, and got the story of what other people, I really wished I'd have done that. But looking back, I can't believe that I didn't get lost in Brazil or left behind. I mean, I barely knew I should get on the plane at 2 o'clock in the morning in Peru. I mean, what would have happened? There are so many. I don't know if I believe in divine intervention or, those things. But for some reason, I didn't fail along the way. And the other thing is, it made me trust in myself. That's another lesson I learned from that. You've got to put in the work, but you've got to trust yourself. And so looking back, I'm so happy that I did what I did. There's nothing about my life that's been a bad experience. There are experiences that I haven't had, and I'm all about experiences, but I don't lament those because I've had such a rich life anyway. I mean, it's been full of adventure. I couldn't have picked a better mate. She wants what I want. She goes about life differently than I do. But in the end, I think we want the same things. And that's been a great comfort.
Who taught you the most Portuguese?
Well, nobody actually sat down and taught me. It's all self-taught. But what made me move forward was after we were married. So I got there in December, late November, December. And after we were married in February, we were sent to the north part of the country where Adelaide had a half-sister, the oldest half-sister that she had, who was married and had a family. They had kids. Let's see, Adelaide was 19. They had kids that were 16 or 17. But anyway, the dad, this was a sugarcane plantation where they used ox carts and people walked around barefoot and there was no electricity, no piped in water, just spring-fed water that came out of the side of a hill. But anyway, we were shipped up there because we started to become a burden. I mean, I had no job. Adelaide had tried to work a little bit, and the guy that made it happen was the brother-in-law, or this uncle. She called him uncle. He looked at me one day and he said, "I'm tired of having this translation. You are going to learn Portuguese." So from that point forward, and he had kids that liked me, young kids. So I had somebody to talk to. I had kids to learn with. And that's when I actually started looking at some grammar books. And I started working on my vocabulary. And that's when I learned to use basic Portuguese.
For sure. So how long from when you meet Adelaide to when you guys get married?
So,
Oh, sorry. From the time you get to Brazil and Seattle to the time you guys get married.
so I got there. I should have remembered that better about exactly what month I got there. We got married in February, and I got there in November. And what happened was I was living for free at their place, and I had no job and no money. And the family was getting curious what's supposed to happen next, because it is Brazilian culture to not throw somebody out. And they didn't just look at me one day and say, you need to leave. That in itself is a miracle. And so I had been curious whether Adelaide would want to get married, but like I said, she was going to high school classes every day. I was going to the beach. And but I finally decided it's time to figure out what's next. So as I recall, we were at the beach one night, sitting in a little bar, because she could drink underage there. And I wanted to know whether she actually wanted me. I wasn't really sure of that. We were having a lot of fun, but it was a pretty serious thing. For me, marriage is a lifelong commitment. And I remember thinking, I really need to know if she wants me. If she doesn't, I need to be able to read into what she's saying and hit the road, because I can't keep living like this. So, as I recall, we talked about it that night, and I actually thought that she would do it and that she wanted to, that she thought it was a good idea. However, later I come to find out that maybe she wasn't so sure, but the deed was done.
What made you think she took that leap of faith? What made her take that leap of faith?
Well, I've actually heard her tell other people that she was so young and had such a little understanding of life that she thought like a teenager and thought in her mind, if this works, good. If it doesn't, no harm, no foul. I'll just go home, or I'll just, we'll just go apart. Because we hadn't discussed where we would live. The only discussion is, should we get married? Nothing was thought out beyond that. What kind of job? What do you want? Do you like kids? There's nothing was talked about except, would we be good for each other? That's all it was.
So then, what you can choose to stay in Brazil or the U.S. What sort of, why did you guys kind of choose to live in the U.S.?
So eventually we plan the wedding. We have a wedding. We live with her family in São Paulo, because Adelaide's dad traveled. It was closer. We moved in with a family that already had 3 kids. One of them was 2 years younger than Adelaide. That was Ivani and Humberto. We lived with them for a while. I tried to get a job in advertising. Adelaide goes to work at a place called Pial, which was an international company, and she did translating work for them. The family bought a car. I became the family chauffeur. That's all I really did to earn my keep. And anything anybody wanted. If they wanted groceries, if they wanted bread, they bought fresh bread every morning. I was the bread guy. So anything I could do to make life easier is what my job became. And that's when the wedding ceremonies took place. We got married. We had a civil wedding and a church wedding. And the only ones that attended were a couple of half-sisters of Adelaide's and their spouses. And it was totally controlled. I had no money, so Adelaide's sister took me shopping, bought the wedding ring, bought the clothing, bought new shoes. Adelaide's dad took me out and got me a butch haircut. Because when I first got there, I had the big beard and long hair and everything. So anyway, the wedding takes place. We have a wedding honeymoon. We go to some beach somewhere. And we get back. And we find out that we're being shipped up to the north to live with Adelaide's family. The guy said that made me speak Portuguese. Because it was less of a burden. We lived in a 3-bedroom house with Adelaide's parents, Adelaide's sister and brother-in-law, and 3 kids. And they gave us their bedroom to live in.
Where did they sleep?
They shared they slept in one of the other bedrooms and had kids, moved the kids' beds in there. They all slept in there. Never once did they give me they just treated me like family. It was the most accepting. It's the one time in my life where I have felt 100% accepted without any expectation whatsoever. And it actually made more pressure to be a decent human being. And I learned what it's like for people that go to another country and have nothing and rely 100% on the goodwill of others. I know what it's like to be a foreigner in a foreign land and have nothing. And it made me appreciate that for those people and for myself. This is goodwill. Truly goodwill. Makes me emotional just thinking about it. But anyway, we were shipped off up north. 12-hour bus ride. 1 suitcase. Got off the bus in the middle of farm country, sugarcane country. At midnight, with a 200-yard, 200 or 300-yard long driveway walk, dirt road, down to a house that functioned off of kerosene lamps, kerosene refrigerator, and water. It came out of a hillside where they stuck a 4-inch PVC pipe into it to a tank on top of the house that filled up. And that's how it worked. I couldn't believe where I was at. No glass in the windows, no screens on the shutters, shuttered at night and bats flying around inside the house at night. It was an adobe house with a clay roof. It was a throwback in time. And so for me, I felt like it was part of my adventure, and I was just loving every minute of it. I was in another time period, in another place, in another world. For me, it was paradise. And I assumed my role of being helpful and just not getting in the way. And they were thrilled to have us as hosts, and they gave us food, shelter, and introduced us to a whole nother family. I bet I met a family, 50 extended family members. I went to parties. Everybody treated me good.
For sure.
It was amazing.
So what was kind of Adelaide looking to do at this time?
Well, I didn't care much what Adelaide thought or wanted, because that's just the way, and it wasn't because I didn't care, it was because I was too naive. I mean, I didn't know how to make a future or think about a future. But what we did start to talk about is, where are we going to live? And I would have left her had we not been able to come back to the United States, because I couldn't function there. I wasn't learning. Maybe if I'd have been forced to learn faster and forced, like you're either going to be on the street or you're going to learn how to survive here. I was never forced that way. Like it is with somebody, like if you're an alien, you got to do it. So I did start the conversation about we need to go to the United States. Not whether that's forever or not, but we need to go to the United States because I was starting to feel I've lived off of people too long. I need to get my life in order. And the only way to do it is to go home. And you're just going to have to come with me. And so when we originally started investigating that, I think that's another reason that we were shipped up north is that once we talked about the possibilities of coming to the United States, she couldn't leave until June. And we got married in February because she'd been in a foreign exchange program. And part of the requirements were that you stay home in your home country and you give back all the benefits you got from foreign travel, and you're supposed to bring back that and be a part of our society. So it was not legal for her to leave. And we had to get a sponsorship.
Okay.
That was the next hurdle that kept us from leaving, is we had to get somebody in this country to sponsor Adelaide and take responsibility for all of her financial needs. So again, being the kind of guy I was and the way I was raised, I figured, so what? Mom and Dad will do that. I mean, it never occurred to me throughout this whole ordeal. I mean, I wasn't unaware. I knew I was a burden. But it never occurred to me that it wasn't going to finish. It wasn't going to be carried out. It wasn't going to, this is going to make this happen. I never conceived that somebody would refuse or not do it. That's the way I treat other people. If they need something from me, you got it. So I just lived my life that way. And so we had to do all this correspondence, translating documents. My parents had to put their life out there, commit, because, what happens if she gets home, gets in a car wreck, or we come back here and thousands in medical, they were responsible. But they did it.
So what was it like? Do you remember at all the first time Adelaide met your parents?
Well, she had met them. Adelaide met my parents.
Sorry, because sorry.
So Adelaide had met my parents, and they actually loved her. Adelaide met my parents when she was here originally, and my parents have always done for their kids whatever was needed. It didn't occur to me what a burden it was, or could become. I didn't see it as a burden because I viewed it that I will take over my life and I will make things happen. I won't be a burden. But the possibility of becoming a burden was there. So that was kind of scary, but we couldn't leave. And eventually the paperwork came through and we were able to move on.
You get back to the States. Where do you kind of go from there?
So after we decided to come back, then I started looking at my life a little more seriously about what I need to do. Of course, my first responsibility had changed. It used to be first responsibility was myself, and now it's Adelaide. And I actually wanted a family. So at that point, I took everything that my parents had told me how to survive. You don't need schooling. All you need to do is know how to work. Well, that I knew how to do. So I got a job immediately in construction, and I worked with my dad for a while, but we moved in with my parents, and I started to pursue the idea that I would become a lifelong construction worker. And if I'm going to do that, I'm going to the top of the food chain. I will be the best, and I will be the guy that doesn't have to work. And that was my career path and my career plan at that time. I never really gave a thought to what Adelaide may do because I didn't know what a dynamo she really was. And I didn't know what she really needed personally. I hadn't asked her because I thought there's so much to do. We're going to have kids, she's just going to have to take care of the kids while I'm working. It was the whole classic lifestyle.
You sold someone short here in terms of their abilities.
After being back here, well, she became pregnant with Nolan right away. And I was working on the road, and she had no family and no support. So that's when we really started cranking down on what plans are going to be, because I was working out of town. She was pregnant. She didn't drive. She couldn't get around. She had no friends. She had no family, really, because my family didn't understand her, and they were all busy doing their own thing. They weren't mean to her. They just ignored her. But in her culture, that is mean. Ignoring somebody as a family member is mean.
What do you think it was like? Transition. You had the transition of being in Brazil. What was the transition like for her now? Obviously, you'd been in foreign exchange, but what was it like now? Being like, oh, well, you're going to be here for like.
Well, I think the biggest thing was that she needed me around her, and she needed contact, and that's what was going to help her transition. She didn't get to transition until I started understanding my role, my true role, what I had actually committed to and what was required. And at that point is when I realized that she needed something to do. She actually took a job while she was pregnant, making beds at a hotel and cleaning. She took a job working at a junkyard, filing information. She had another job putting handy projects into boxes to be mailed out. So she was very willing to do anything that would occupy her time, but she didn't tell me right away, I want to become a nurse or I want to work in healthcare. Until things settled down and we were actually learning what a marriage is, because we were strangers. We were strangers. We had no time together. We always lived with somebody else. We were kids living under an adult roof. And what really made me understand that we were in it together was we hadn't only stayed at my parents' house for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and she was looking for a place to live independently, even though I wasn't making much money and she wasn't making any. She's like, we're moving out. And I said, well, thanks for telling me. She was a dynamo, no doubt about it. So once we got out of my parents' house, then I knew it was all for real. It's just me and her. She sees me when I come home at night. I see her when I come home at night. There's no other distractions. And that's when we started having conversations. Because she had Nolan, I think before she started nursing school. Yeah. Then she proposed that idea to me, and I thought it was a good idea. I didn't know what I was getting into, but it didn't matter. It was time for her. At that point, I knew for her to survive, she needed what she wanted. And so I got on board. And I was always a good father, a good helper, a good husband. I didn't have any problems. I never needed to see friends or stay out late or go, I was totally committed. Her happiness after hearing her cry over the phone when I was out of town was killing me. So she was a lot happier person. So I thought, well, this is a good thing to do. I'll do this, she'll be happy. And that's when I changed how I viewed my whole life. And so she went to nursing school, and she graduated from there when she was pregnant with Leandra. It was a lot of work, but man, that's when I found out what an amazing person she was. What a knowledgeable person she was. How much she cared about life. How much she cared about me. Yeah. It became very real.
It's not an easy thing to do all that.
No, it's a process, but once I realized that I was harming her, I changed everything. I changed everything. I wasn't harming her intentionally. I wasn't harming her for my own benefit. I didn't know any better. I had no plan. And she's the person I learned from about the importance of making a plan and the benefits of making a plan. That's when I became a planner. Through Adelaide. I give her all the credit. I mean, I did the work, but she made me understand the benefits of it. Yeah.
Talking about, so now you've become a dad, what was it like? You obviously grew up in a larger family overall. Like, what was it? Was it what you thought it would be? What was it like becoming a dad?
Well, the whole marriage image, I think I alluded to earlier, was one of more of a traditional marriage. Hubby goes to work, mommy stays home and is a housewife. So I am so glad that disappeared. I mean, that's what made all of this richness possible. But I will have to say, in the early days, that it was hard for me to learn that lesson. There were times I wanted to spend Saturday afternoon with my buddies, or doing something I wanted to do, or simply leave the house. But when your mate is somebody that has no family and no friends, that's like the meanest thing you can do. And I did that. I had some slight woe is me moments. Oh, poor me. But I knew it was wrong, and I knew what was right, and I did what was right. I wanted to have kids, and we did. When I had Nolan, the first thing I did, I left the hospital, I went out and had a steak dinner on my own, and then the first time I had him outside, I held him up to the sky and I said, Kunta Kinte! Yeah. Nobody's ever been happier than I was to be a dad. I mean, it was the whole Disney thing for me. It was. I couldn't have been happier. I couldn't have been more satisfied. It's what I wanted, and I got what I wanted. Who gets to say that? Not everybody. And it was what I wanted. It wasn't just something that I got and I changed my mind on later. Maybe I didn't really want that. It's what I wanted, and I stick with what I want. I wanted Adelaide for a lifetime, and I got her for a lifetime. I wanted kids, I got kids. So I couldn't have been happier about it. But did I struggle with young man, immature issues, not knowing? Yeah. But I never gave up the faith because I was taught that, you know. Once you're in, you're all in. You don't quit. So I just made it work. Each time I faced something really hard, moving to Iowa City was really hard. I had to drive over here 4 o'clock in the morning and start a job in a career I had no knowledge of. Just a promise that I would be assisted to learn it. I had 2 kids, a wife going to med school. I always have seen myself as a breadwinner. Mostly a role like that so that Adelaide could pursue what she wanted to pursue.
So what was your day? So first, tell us specifically what the job was. What was your day like during that time, you know?
You know, the way that job started, it's totally shocking to me because the job was assistant director of facilities, Iowa City Schools, and the accommodation that they extended to me, I still can't believe it to this day. But they had to, because during the interview I told them, I don't really know how to do what you're asking me to do. If you don't train me, I won't be able to do the job. The guy actually looked at me and said, do you want this job? I said, I have to have this job. If you'll hire me, I have to have it. But I'm not going to tell you a bunch of stories about things I can do that I'm just telling you, beware, you know, I don't know this. So the first day at work, for a month, I didn't do anything until I was trained. Well, here's a Rolodex. You might need these numbers. Oh, here's a list of employees. You might need these. I didn't say, where's my list of employees? Where's my Rolodex? Who am I? So I didn't ask any questions. I just left it up to them. I stuck around with the director of facilities. He's the one who wanted to hire me because there was an internal employee that wanted to be promoted. They didn't want him. So they took me, and he knew it was a commitment, so he was a great guy. It reminded me of my dad. I got along with him perfect. He showed me everything, the entire business. I mean, what the hell did I know about cleaning and custodial staff? I knew nothing about that. What did I know about the legalities of construction? I knew nothing about that. What did I know about having employees and speaking in front of employees? I knew nothing about that. I knew zero about this job when I took it. So, which is what I think eventually drove me to anxiety and depression years down the road. It was so much. I was always on the edge of, will they find me out? Will somebody notice that I didn't really come to this job with the right qualifications? I knew how to do the job, but
you do realize you have a good poker face.
Was never secured. Huh?
You do realize you have a good poker face.
Well, I prefer to think of that as we're both equals. And when I speak sincerely, I'm not feeding a line of bullshit. I'm telling the truth.
Okay.
So, typical day.
Yeah.
So you're talking about like when I was driving from Des Moines?
With 2 kids.
No kids.
What?
So, what happened was when I started the job, Adelaide we owned a house in Des Moines, and we didn't have a place to live here yet. She was still in the process of getting all of her entry into medical school work done. let's see, I can't remember what month it was, whether the kids were on vacation. But what happened was we had to find a place to live. So I found a place to rent and rented the place, got it rented before I started work. And so what I would do is I would drive straight to work. I would work all day. I would go back to this house, and what it had was a bed and a TV and some cooking utensils. There was absolutely nothing else in there. And I would get up at 4 in the morning. I think I tried to start work by 7. And I would drive over and I would get to work. I'd be in my work clothes. That's the way it had to go until we got set up to get everybody moved. That lasted, I think, for a couple of weeks. I would come over on my own because we still had to move everything from the house, and that we weren't ready to do that. We had to sell the house. So for a couple of weeks, I think, maybe a month, but a couple of weeks, it was closer to a month. Because I brought a saw, I did some projects eventually. But I was coming over all by myself every day and then driving home every night. Until I got the house. Yeah, so the drive was for about a week and a half or 2 weeks, and then we got the house, and then I just lived over here by myself. And they lived in Des Moines. That's right. And so work was all about learning every day what's next. You know, how does this work? What am I supposed to do? What does an assistant director do? Well, they manage this, they manage the custodians, they manage construction workers, they get them out the door, they approve vacations, they deal with personal problems. You know, there was just a lot to the job, and I had the perfect guy to take me through it because he also believed in the fact that the worker is important, and he related to them on a personal basis.
Who was that guy?
His name was Wayne Gerard, and we actually had similar thoughts on, I didn't have very well developed thoughts at that time. I hadn't gone to four-year college. I didn't know about labor contracts, but through life experience, if I were to say, just in personal beliefs that were totally unpolished, unwritten, and just in my mind, he had a view of life and what labor management relations are or should be. So it was very easy to work with this guy.
For sure.
And
one thing I do want to talk about, switching gears a little bit, I do want to talk about singing. I do want to talk about Barbershop. How did you...
Okay, I was in my first barbershop experience at age 6 because my dad sang barbershop in Des Moines. They put me on a stage, and my dad had barbershop records, the Buffalo Bills and all the greats. And I heard barbershop music while I was growing up. My dad tried to get us to make a quartet with me and my brothers when we were younger. Didn't fly. Hated singing. Never took any singing lessons. Never did anything to do with entertainment. That was for sissies when we were in high school. I was a sports guy. Learned that from Dad also. But I always loved the sound of barbershop. It was an attractive sound. So, well, I think I just got my 25th year membership card. So 25 years ago, I heard about a barbershop chorus presentation at West High School, and I attended that. And one of the guys that sang in that happened to be a principal at one of the schools. Well, in the career that I was in, I knew every principal in the school district. And I got to talking with him, and he said, "You should come and sing with us." Little did he know I had no singing experience, could barely read music, and suffer from intense performance anxiety. Yeah, true. I'm extremely, the first time I had to speak in front of the people at work, I had sweat running down my back. It was just terrible. I learned to control that through some counseling. It was good for me because I had the extreme anxiety. But anyway, they told me that I sang good enough to become a part of the chorus, and they would worry about the rest. So I had always wanted to sing. Singing is a very refreshing thing to do. Just put it out there. And then throughout the years, I've learned from other people. I should have taken voice lessons, but I've learned from other people that you can improve your singing. You can become a better singer. You just have to work at it. And here's some of the things you do. So that's why I've remained with it, because as a matter of fact, my friend Eddie convinced me to sing at a friend of ours' funeral. Dr. Dale Bieber died a few years ago. And at his celebration of life, my buddy Eddie said, we should get a quartet and sing. And I said, Eddie, you knew I don't do quartetting. He goes, this is for Dale. You loved him, I loved him. I said, yeah, I did. I had so much respect. Then you need to buck up and do it. So he organized it. I sang lead, he sang bass. Let's see, who sang tenor? I can't think of his name right now. And a baritone was a friend of Eddie's. Dave Scott, I think it was. So anyway, no, it was Mark Sodawasser. Mark sang with us. We sang Roll Out the Barrel at his celebration of life. It was good. And once you learn to control your anxiety and have faith in yourself, which is something that I learned about the other things that I did in my life, it was just the hardest to do with singing. It's still a tough thing for me, but I love it. And the guys are very good guys.
So now, your children are grown. Now you have grandkids. What's it like being a grandparent?
Well, I wanted to be a grandpa second after wanting to be a father, because I still believe in this circle of life and that you pass things on and family history, and I believe in all of that. I see it differently now that I've been that guy for 14 years. But to be there, to learn how to be there and be supportive for adult kids is a whole nother ball game, because they really only need you or want you when they do. Outside of that, they don't necessarily need your preaching or your life examples. That's the truth of it. And to learn that is both painful and at the same time reassuring. Because once they hit that stage, they're on their own. So, do I need to worry about them anymore? Only because I love them. Not because I need to help them.
For sure.
Yeah. So doing that, but doing that as a young guy while Adelaide was totally involved and immersed in what she was doing, wasn't that easy. But I did learn that it is the small things in life, and that's what I wanted, and to enjoy what I wanted for just what it was. It's just cleaning dirty butts, getting them places on time, making sure they do things. So what? I used to take Leander to gymnastics practice 5 nights a week, and I would sit there for 2 hours 5 nights a week. I could have been doing something for myself. But she wanted it, so I thought I should be there for her. And she liked it. It's always happy to see my family genuinely in a period of enjoyment, euphoria, happiness, whatever you want to call it, that still makes me satisfied. Yeah. Very satisfying.
For sure. I think the only other thing, am I missing it? Wait. I need to check Nolan and Landry before that.
Nolan got a hold of you too.
Well, it's a whole complicated thing, but
Oh my God, thank you, Richie.
Yeah.
Rich, I called you Richie.
it's all right. No,
The only thing that's
Andrew's like, how nice are you? Oh, really? And I'm just like, it's like, with all of you guys, it's fine. It's okay. I don't care.
well,
When people in the
Adelaide's
tennis community do it, I get like,
Adelaide's friends
you call
from back
me-
home still call her Addie.
Addie,
And
yeah, sure.
the first thing that happened when we moved here is I'm no longer Addie, I'm Adelaide. And I had to learn it.
well, your wife and my girlfriend have the same nickname then sometimes. Except for it's Adi.
Addie.
Adi.
That's what everybody called her that's her nickname from when she was here as a foreign exchange student. Everybody called her Addie.
Yep.
Addie.
Yep.
And that's the first thing that changed when we moved to Iowa City. I am no longer Addie.
I totally get it.
So I have respect for your wishes. In my phone, though, it still says Richie.
That's okay. Don't change it.
I'm not going to change that.
Good. Good. So I want to talk like a little bit like about the art thing. You've been a lifelong artist.
Well, you need to let me say that being in the Big Brothers program was one of the best things that happened to me. No, just that.
All right. So-
You know how I told you having a family made me a man?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
being a big brother led me into seniorhood. It helped me deal with grandkids.
Tell me what.
I'm serious.
What made you kind of get interested in the program? What was the process to start involving the big?
I never thought of it. Adelaide, my big motivator, who knew everything I ever needed or wanted to do in my life, said, you need to get in the Big Brothers program. And I said, you think so? What do I know about it? And she's like, you need to. And I said, well, why do you keep saying that? She said, well, she was right about this. She said, you're suffering from empty nest syndrome because I was really missing my kids after they left home. Really, really missing interacting with them. And I kept poo-pooing it and finally said, okay, I'll go down and see what it's like. And one of the things I'm going to have to tell you, Rich, and maybe I've told you this before, but I told the woman, what if I don't like him or he doesn't like me? Have I ever told you that? Yeah. Yeah, that was like, once they assured me that everything will be fine. I mean, I was adult enough by then to know better, but I was still torn by that concept. What could happen? I mean, I don't want to be a failure, you know? This is a big responsibility. And it helped me, it reminded me of what young people are like and what they go through. And it made me a better adult because I learned more respect for young people and young kids and what their needs are. I learned even more, even after having raised kids, because I made a lot of errors as a first-time parent with kids. I didn't say the right thing. I didn't do the right thing. I didn't know what to do. And I felt like with the experience I had, I could do the right thing and not do you harm. The whole key was to not do harm to Rich.
I was V2. I was version 2.
Yeah. I mean, that's what everybody should strive for. Don't do harm to kids. And you can harm them just by pushing your beliefs on them. You don't even realize you're doing it. You think you're just raising paying.
So what type of things would you do with Richie Redfern? What type of things would you do?
Well, I did what they told me. They said, make sure he has a good time. So if ever I didn't know what to do, I just said, what do you want to do? That's the way I'm remembering it. What do you want to do? And then I had to have some ideas and then get out of the way. That was the deal.
So what did we do?
Well, I remember going to the university one time, walking through the hospital or whatever. We went up to the hospital or something. We walked through and we looked at artwork. One time we did that. You don't remember that? I took you up there and did that one time. You should see this stuff. And we spent a lot of time at the rec center. And, you know, it's a good thing that I did know a little bit about how to play ping pong previous to that. Because I think you would have been bored to death had I have taken you there and I didn't know how to play. You would have been like, what's this old man doing bringing me over here, you know? I don't know. Maybe you were younger than, maybe you didn't have those kind of thoughts because you were just so young at the time. I don't know what you were thinking. That's another thing I learned, is that you don't know what young kids are thinking. If you want to know, you gotta figure out a way that they'll open up to you, you know? So what else did we do? We spent some time taking pictures. We spent some time evaluating girls. We rated them 1 through 10. I actually enjoyed that. I thought it was funny to see you at that stage of your life. Because when I met you, you weren't thinking those kind of things. You were awful young still. So I was enjoying the fact of watching you transition. But that's one of the things we did. Yeah, and as I recall, we camped together, didn't we? Didn't we take you camping?
Oh, yeah.
We took a boat ride all the way up the Mississippi River, a couple 100 miles. I think you went to Des Moines with us, didn't you? I introduced you to my family somehow. I'm not remembering the specifics, a lot of it, but I think that we did.
That's how I know you don't lock the doors.
Yeah. And sometimes you'd sit down in the basement and just play a computer game. I don't remember what it was.
SWAT 3.
SWAT 3.
How does it feel that, like, you have this little and that, like, the little's interviewing now? How does it feel to see the relationship evolve over so many years and all that stuff?
Well, the way I look at I think about it every so often. What's new about this relationship? And I think that I have learned that you've become an entire person, and to see all the things that I used to think about and wonder about, what's Rich going to be like in the future. It gives me great satisfaction to still know you and get to see what's happened to you since I knew you as a tyke, you know? That is a very satisfying thing. So I'm so glad Adelaide got the whole thing started. And it's also nice to relate to you one-on-one as just a person, not as a big, you know? This is a 50-50 relationship. That's the way I see it. You're an accomplished person now. And, you know, I got nothing left to offer. Just friendship. That's it.
That's worth something.
Yeah, it is. So, but at the time, you know, I lived this, I have this responsibility. Maybe I took it more than what it was, or maybe I always imagined that more was happening than what was actually happening. But after having raised my own kids and seeing how they turned out later, I realized that there are things that you do at these early stages with young people that show up later, you know. So I learned to love the responsibility. That's what was good about it.